It's springtime in Spain as I record this video, and as the weather starts to get better, the temperatures start to creep up, there's one other thing that happens around this time of year, and that's Spanish tax season. That's right, during 3 months of the year, Spanish tax residents and people who live in Spain are working on their annual tax declaration that they will present to the tax authorities every year. But who needs to make this declaration? What exactly do they have to declare? How does the declaration work? And when are the deadlines for declaring? That's what we're going to cover in today's video. Let's go right into it. If you're new here, my name is Jonny. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working in Spain for the past 5.5 years. On this channel, I talk a lot about life in Spain, particularly the financial and administrative aspect of things such as property, immigration, taxes, and I also share my different experiences of travel around the world as well. So as I mentioned in the intro, starting in April and ending in June, this is kind of the big important period of the tax calendar for Spanish tax residents, because this is when Spanish tax residents need to complete the annual personal income tax declaration and present it to the Spanish tax authorities. And that annual tax declaration is always done for the previous year to the one that we're currently in. So for example, in 2025, people will be completing their 2024 annual income tax declaration. And this is essentially the same time period every year. So it doesn't matter whether you're watching this video now in 2025, 1 year later in 26, 27, whenever, this is the time period when the annual tax declaration is completed and submitted. And as a result, the dates are broadly the same, but let me give you the dates for specific activities in 2025 so that you can see an example of how this works. So on the 2nd of April in 2025, this is when on the Agencia Tributaria, which is the tax authority here in Spain, this is when on their website, the online declaration will become available, both where you can see your draft declaration with initial information collected by the tax authorities, and it's also the place where you can add additional information before submitting it to the tax authorities. So this opens on the 2nd of April, and with the progressive digitalization of administrative services in Spain, this is probably going to be the route that most people go down for the presentation of their tax declaration. There are, however, 2 other ways that you can present that tax declaration, one of them being over the phone. So starting on the 29th of April, people will be able to reserve phone appointments starting from the 6th of May up until the 27th of June to complete their annual declaration over the phone. And the third option is to complete the declaration in person. So starting on the 29th of May, people will be able to make in-person appointments from the 2nd of June up until the 27th of June to complete their declaration in person at one of the offices of the Agencia Tributaria. The deadline for all tax declarations to be submitted to the tax authorities is the 30th of June. So anybody who needed to submit their tax declaration and has not done so by the 30th of June is liable for late penalties for a late submission of their tax declaration. So it is important to keep these deadlines in mind so you can ensure a complete and timely submission of your tax declaration to the tax authorities. And now, because I said anybody who needs to submit a tax declaration needs to do so before the 30th of June, you might be asking yourself, well, who does need to submit a tax declaration? And well, to be honest, the better question is who doesn't need to submit a tax declaration, because the majority of people who are tax resident in Spain will fulfill the criteria to need to submit a tax declaration to the tax authorities every year. And so there's 3 groups of people who potentially don't need to fill out a tax declaration. So the first group of people who potentially don't have to do a tax declaration are people who have only investment income below 1,600 euros. So if your investment income, whether it's capital gains, dividends, is your only source of income and is less than 1,600 euros during the Spanish tax year, which is the 1st of January to the 31st of December, then you potentially won't need to complete a Spanish tax declaration. The second group of people who potentially don't need to complete the tax declaration are people who have only property income or treasury bond income that is less than 1,000 euros in the tax year. So these people also potentially don't need to complete the annual tax declaration. And the third group of people who potentially don't need to fill out an annual tax declaration are people who do not earn above a certain threshold. Now, what are these thresholds? So if you received your money from one payer, as it's defined. Now, a payer, we can say it's an employer, for example. It could be a pension plan. It could be benefits from social security. Then that threshold is set at 22,000 euros. So if you had the same employer for the whole tax year, for example, and you didn't make above 22,000 euros, you will be exempt from completing the annual tax declaration. If it's more than one payer, however, let's say, for example, you changed employers during the year, or let's say you were employed, but then you became unemployed and received unemployment benefits from Social Security, that threshold drops down to 15,876 euros. It's really important to keep that in mind. Take into account your income situation situation for the tax year that you're declaring for, and be sure to double check whether you do need to complete that income tax declaration or not. And so what goes into the annual tax declaration in Spain? Well, as one might expect, of course, employment income will go in there. Any deductible expenses, if you're an autonomo, will be included in there. Any property income would be included, dividends, capital gains, things like that. And they'll be separated into the different buckets, essentially. One known as the base general, which is for employment income, essentially for economic activity, and the other known as the base de ahorro, which covers investment income like capital gains, dividends, and interest. And I've got a video where I talk more about how the Spanish income tax system as a whole works. If you want to check that out, I'll leave the link at the top for you. But not only are you including income from economic activity and from investments, you're also including, personal details or benefits and deductions that you're eligible for, because these things work essentially to reduce your tax base, and it could mean that you end up paying less tax or that you're owed a refund, which is what we're going to see in the next section of the video. So you can get deductions and tax benefits for things like being a new autonomo, for having a large family, which is 3 or more children, if I'm not mistaken. You can get deductions for filing a joint declaration if you're married, which may be beneficial in some cases. You can get certain deductions at the autonomous community level as well, based on specific criteria or different initiatives that are run at the autonomous community level. Deductions for pension plan contributions as well, which can help to lower your tax base and what you pay tax on as well. Also, things such as whether you're renting your primary residence or whether you own your primary residence, as this could potentially impact the declaration as well. And also any other properties that you've got in your name as well, like whether it's a rental property or a garage or a storage room or something like that. These would also be included. And so once you've input all that information, this is essentially where the essence of the tax declaration comes in. Because throughout that tax year, let's take 2024 for example, if you have employment income, your employer would have been withholding a certain percentage of that of tax. And if you have income from investment platforms that are based in Spain, for example, like interest from your bank, or if you've got a Spanish stockbroker and you make capital gains, that will also be automatically withheld on the platform and reported to the tax authority. So all of this should be included in your draft declaration. And that will essentially create what is called the cuota íntegra in Spanish, which is basically the tax that you owe based on variable elements of the tax base. That's already been withheld throughout the year. But as I say, when you apply deductions or tax benefits, for example, or if you're declaring additional capital gains from a broker that's not in Spain, maybe, these can all affect that final taxation once they're included in the declaration. And so when you take all of these other elements into account, that creates what's known as the cuota líquida, which takes into account these fixed elements or elements that weren't essentially included throughout the year initially. And that's essentially your final tax bill. And then what the declaration basically does is it looks at the difference between the cuota íntegra and the cuota líquida, so what's already been withheld and what is really owed based on what you've just declared. And that will determine a result of your tax declaration. And you've got two possible outcomes in Spanish. You've got que te sale a pagar, which is basically you owe the tax authorities additional money based on what was already withheld. So you need to make a payment on top of that. Or there's the possibility that te sale a devolver, which is basically that the tax authority owes you money based on what you've declared. And so as one might expect, if you owe the tax authorities money, then pretty much very soon after that tax declaration, there will be like a direct debit from your bank account to the tax authority with the difference of the money that you owe. But depending on how much it is, I believe that you can also like split that payment out and pay it over a period of time. In certain cases, maybe. In the case that you're owed money from the tax authority, it really depends. Like in some cases it can be quick, in other cases it can take up to 3 months. And it may be the case as well that depending on what you've declared exactly, the tax authority asks for additional information to justify that you're owed money. Which if that happens, it's important to respond quickly and with the correct information in as much detail as possible to make sure that you don't end up in problems for, potentially, and that they think you've maybe tried to submit an incorrect declaration. So anyways, that's the principle of how the tax declaration works. In this video, I'm not going to show the form in detail, though I do have a video from about 3 years ago where I did go through each of the boxes in detail and explain what the form looks like. So it really hasn't changed that much in 3 years, and if you do want to see that in detail again, I'll leave the link for you. What I am going to do, however, is take you over to Excel and give you a fictional example of how this might work in practice, so as you can get an idea of how the principles work of the tax declaration with some numbers on the screen. So let's get right over to Excel now. All right, so for the purposes of this example, let's take someone who is living in Madrid, who is an employee who makes 30,000 euros a year. So throughout the course of 2024, let's assume that this is for 2024 and he's declaring this in 2025, that he was paid 30,000 euros by his employer. So by default, his employer will apply a retention percentage to withhold tax and pay it to the tax authorities. Let's say that they used 15.5% like we see in the file here. And so the employer essentially withheld 4,635 euros. So this would be, in theory, his quota integra. And so this is what we've got here. We've got his quota integra copy pasted into this cell right here. But let's say that over the course of the year, let's say this guy made some pension plan contributions. Let's say he made 1,500 euros of pension plan contributions. So if we add that in and we stop there, that would mean that his tax base goes down essentially, so he pays tax on less money. And so his quota líquida in this case would be 4,218 euros, which is 417 euros, which is below what his employer had withheld for the tax authorities. So if we were to stop right here and nothing else were to happen, this guy would in theory be owed 417 euros from the tax authorities in this case. We're not going to stop here though, we're going to make up some more stuff and see how this impacts the declaration as well. Let's say his employer also made some contributions to that pension plan. Let's say they made 300 euros. So again, the tax base goes down further, and now he would be owed 500 euros. But what if this guy has loads of dividend stocks and capital gains that he's made as well? Let's say he made, for example, 500 euros of capital gains. And let's say that he made, let's say he's a high roller. Let's say he made 4,000 euros in dividend income. And so in this case, for simplicity, we're going to assume that these capital gains and dividends were made on a broker outside of Spain, because if it were the case that he were doing this on a Spanish platform, in theory, this would have already been withheld. So we're going to say that no, that these hadn't been withheld in Spain and that he has to declare them as part of his declaration. And so in doing that, his tax liability goes up to 4,989 euros, which is higher than what has been withheld. So in this case, the guy from our example would owe the tax authority money. He'd owe them 354 euros. And then, I don't know, let's say he gets some random deduction. We'll make one up for 500 euros. And so now his tax liability comes down to 4,850 euros, but it's still higher than what was withheld by his employer. So he does still owe the tax authorities money. So you can see from that example the number of different factors that can influence and impact the result of an annual tax declaration based on what was originally withheld versus what is really owed based on other income and deductions. And if you like the look of that Excel file and you want to have a go at putting your own numbers in to see what your final tax bill would be in Spain, then the good news for you is that this is actually available for download on my website. You can either download it by itself or as part of a bundle along with the cost of living estimate calculator and with a property purchase cost calculator as well, depending on what you want. Whilst this calculator won't directly help you with the annual tax declaration, it is good for getting an idea of understanding what tax you would expect to pay in Spain, particularly useful if you're coming from another country and you want to work out exactly what your tax liability might be. This calculator as well was designed with the help of a Spanish tax professional and has been tried and tested to a high degree of accuracy against other tax estimate calculators online. And so when it comes to doing the annual tax declaration, as I mentioned at the start, there are a number of ways you can do it. You can do it by yourself, as I said, online. I'll put the link to the Agencia Tributaria website in the description for the 100 model, which is the annual tax declaration form, so that you can go over there and have a look at how that works. However, me personally, I do prefer to have the help of someone to look through my declaration with me to make sure that I've done everything right, that I haven't missed anything, and that the possibility of me being subject to penalties for an incorrect or late declaration later down the line is significantly reduced. And so you'll often hear about people talking about gestores in Spain, like specialized accountants who can help you with tax matters, with the annual tax declaration here in Spain. This is one way you can go. If you're looking for a person or a gestor to help you with your annual tax declaration, then be sure to check out my partner Pro Spain Consulting. They'll be happy to have a look and help with your situation when it comes to the annual tax declaration. What's also become more popular over the years are like the DIY tax platforms. So in Spain, there's a very popular one called TaxDown, where essentially you can log on to TaxDown, the website, you can input your data based on the information you have, everything that I mentioned in this video. And then depending on the subscription model that you've chosen, you can either use that to create your own declaration, or simply by sending the information over to the advisors at TaxDown. They can prepare that declaration for you to then review, and they'll then submit it to the tax authorities on your behalf. I'll put a link for TaxDown in the video description as well. So a number of different ways you can complete that declaration depending on what you feel is best for you. But from my perspective, it is definitely possible to do it alone. If you don't have a particularly complicated situation, then by all means, I would say you could have a go at doing it yourself. Me personally, and I'm sure, people who are maybe not so familiar with the Spanish tax system or who have investments, properties, these kind of things, it's definitely worth considering reaching out to a professional to get help with that. So I hope you guys found this video informative and helpful. Leave a comment and let me know if you've completed an annual tax declaration in Spain, who you get help with to complete your tax declaration, and if you've had any horror stories or interesting stories with your tax as well, we'd love to know in the comments. And if you like this video and you want to find out more about how tax works in Spain, then be sure to check out these 2 videos as well. So next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.